The video is based on international trade and a concept called comparative advantage. So, comparative advantage refers to an economy's ability to produce goods and services at a lower opportunity cost than that of trading partners. So, therefore, a comparative advantage gives a country the ability to sell goods and services at an efficient and lower price than its international competitors, and therefore boosting its sales margins. Now, the law of comparative advantage is attributed to David Ricardo, and David Ricardo is, I suppose, the person in this image. And it was in his book on the principles of political economy and taxation in 1817 when he started to speak about this concept of comparative advantage. So David Ricardo was an advocate of international trade and was very liberal in his beliefs. So David Ricardo argued in favour of specialisation and free trade. So he was against the concept of tariffs, and he was really, I suppose, very liberal in his beliefs on international trade and tried to encourage it. And he strongly believed that if both countries recognised which industry they had less of an opportunity cost in and focused production within that industry, then they would make stronger sales. But also the international customer would benefit with higher quality of goods. And because the production is much more efficient, it would result in cheaper products for the customer to buy as well. Furthermore, he believed that other countries would experience these benefits for themselves in their chosen industries. So, in other words, both countries would benefit, both countries' producers, but also both countries' customers. Now, Ricardo attempted to prove theoretically that international trade was always beneficial, and the American economist Paul Samuelson called these numbers that Ricardo used to illustrate it as the four magic numbers. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on these numbers now. So, in spite of the fact that the Portuguese within this example could produce both cloth and wine with less amount of labour, Ricardo suggested that both countries would benefit from trade with each other. So again, just to kind of everything that I've mentioned, the whole idea of comparative advantage is that both countries will benefit from this production process and this transaction. So in order to calculate this, I'm going to show you two similar formulas, but they're going to focus on input and output. So the first one I'm going to look at is the four magic numbers, but via input. David Ricardo illustrated his points via the inputs of workers. And what I mean by inputs is the amount of inputs that were required to produce the goods. So the goods are cloth and wine. And as you can see, England required 100 workers to produce the cloth, whilst Portugal only had to have 90. So again, it took them less people to create this cloth. With wine, England required 120, but Portugal only required 80. So again, in both examples, Portugal required less people, but there's still an opportunity cost that exists. And therefore, for that opportunity cost, it still suggests that Portugal should focus on one of the products to produce to specialise in. So, the first formula that I'm going to introduce you to is gain divided by cost. And what I mean by gain is the product that we're focusing on. So, if we're focusing on this one to begin with, and we're looking at cloth, so if just draw an arrow here, we'll be looking at the cloth versus the cost. And the cost, obviously, if we're focusing on cloth, the cost would be the wine. So, to begin with, what we do is we'd get 100, and this is for England, divided by 120 as our cost. And what we'd get is one cloth equals 0.83 wine. And again, if I use 100 employees or 100 staff members to produce that cloth, then obviously it means that I'm not going to be able to produce as much wine because of that opportunity cost. So therefore, by producing that cloth, I'm going to miss out on wine, and I'll get 0.83 of wine. If we concentrate on Portugal, we've got, again, 90 people for cloth and 80 people for wine. So if you do your 90 divided by your 80, that equals for one cloth, that would equal 1.13 wine. So actually, the opportunity cost is even greater for Portugal within this. And therefore, if we're thinking about which country should focus on cloth, well, you go for the one with the lowest opportunity cost. So actually, what you go for is, in terms of this one, because 0.83 is lower than 1.13. Now, what we need to do is similar for wine. So when we're looking at wine, obviously wine would be the gain, whilst the cost would be cloth because we're focused on wine production. So if we're doing that and we focus on England to begin with, what you'd get is 120 divided by 100. And if we were looking at Portugal, we'd have our 80 and divided by our 90. So 120 divided by 100, you get 1.2 cloths, and 80 divided by 90, you get 0.89 cloths. So the one with the lowest opportunity cost and the one who should focus on wine is obviously this one here, and we're looking at Portugal. Which makes sense because if England are focusing on cloth, then you'd expect Portugal to focus on the other product, which would be wine. So again, UK would rather produce cloth as they would give up less when producing it, and Portugal should produce wine for the same reason. So UK trade cloth with Portugal. They specialise in cloth. They become experts in production of the good, and they sell it to Portugal. Whilst Portugal do the same with wine, and they trade the wine with the UK. In both situations, England benefit, as do Portugal. And that's the input example of comparative advantage. Now, I suppose the exams that I've been looking at in A-level, they usually focus on output. So we're going to look at the output formula now. So as I said, exam boards usually test output, and it's a different formula, and you've got your cost divided by your gain. So remember, with input, it was the other way around. It was your gain divided by your cost, but in output is your cost divided by your gain. You may also see this formula in terms of the good A for country X divided by the quantity of good B for country X. It is pretty much the same formula as this one. The reason I use this one is just because this is the opportunity cost formula. So I'm going to bring us back to the first example in terms of the magic 4, but what I've done is I've just crossed out the number of men, and I'm just actually going to do it as units. So it's 100 units of cloth, it's 90 units of cloth, it's 120 units of wine, and it's 80 units of wine for Portugal. And we're going to use the output formula, okay? So just a reminder is cost divided by gain. So let's focus on England to begin with. So the cost would be the wine of 120, and the gain would be the cloth of 100. So one cloth equals 1.2 wine. Now, if you think about Portugal, and we'll do the same. So 80 divided by 90 equals one cloth would equal 0.89 wines. And because we've changed it to the original example and we're just doing it in units, actually with this one, Portugal should focus on the cloth because they've got a smaller opportunity cost. So it should be Portugal that focuses on the cloth. So now let's have a look at the wine. Obviously, it should be England with the wine, but let's have a look at the numerical evidence to support that. So we can see there 100 divided by 120 equals 0.83 wine, and 90 divided by 80 equals 1.13. So as we can see there, the UK or England has the lowest opportunity cost with this example, so they should do wine. So again, just a reminder, and it's key to remember that you cannot get a comparative advantage in both products. The whole idea is you focus on one product with the lowest opportunity cost to continue to specialise in. Now, this is a multiple choice question from an AQA past paper, and I want you to pause the video. I want you to consider, is it output or is it input? And I want you to use the right formula and attempt the question. So if you want to pause the video now, and then afterwards, I'll go over the answer. Okay, so as we can read the question, the table below shows how much of each of two products can be produced. So therefore, we can see that it's actually output. And because it's output, what you do is your cost divided by your gain. And that will be the formula that we're using. So if we start off with motorbikes, and let's have a look at Brazil and US with motorbikes. So 5 divided by 10, so the car being the cost, the motorbike being the gain, that would mean that one motorbike would equals 0.5 cars. for the US, 2 cars would be the cost, 6 motorbikes would be the gain. So 2 divided by 6 equals 1 motorbike would be the equivalent of 0.33 cars with regards to opportunity cost. So you go for the lowest one. So you go for this one here. So the US have the lowest opportunity cost in producing motorbikes. So now let's have a look at cars. So again, the cost would be the motorbike. So 10 divided by 5, which is the gain, equals 1 car to 2 motorbikes. And for the US, 6 being the cost, 2 being the gain, equals 1 car to 3 motorbikes. So again, the lowest one would be this one, and therefore it would be Brazil, and Brazil should focus on cars.